The Neutrality Bill would amend the Irish Constitution to ensure that Ireland was declared in the Constitution a neutral state. Now, this is a core bill, because what it would mean is that the state as such would be constitutionally neutral. When PANA was founded in 1996, our first clear objective was to seek an amendment to the Constitution to put into the Constitution a provision that would make Ireland a neutral state. It was put forward for the first time in 2003 by Sinn Féin, and it was supported in opposition by the Labour Party and Independents. Yes, the bill was defeated by the Fianna Fáil party and the Progressive Democrats that were then in government. It's now coming before the Dail again on the 27th of February, and then the vote will take place the following Tuesday. The historical reason for that was that when the plane started to land in Shannon Airport, Ed Horgan, who is the International Secretary of PANA, brought a case against the Irish state about the fact that these planes were landing in Shannon. The judge said and agreed with Ed Horgan that the international law as laid down by the Hague Convention of 1907 made it absolutely clear that a state that wishes to be regarded as neutral could not allow its territory to be used, for example, by planes belonging to a state taking part in a war. For example, in 2003, the ambassador to Switzerland was interviewed in the Irish Times and declared the reason why there are no planes landing in Zurich Airport in Switzerland is because Switzerland was a neutral country. What the judge declared in that court case was, yes, this is absolutely the case. However, it's not in Irish law, either domestic law or the Irish Constitution. It's only actual policy. And if there has been, as there was, a long-standing policy of Irish neutrality, if the government wished to change that, it wasn't his job as a judge to interfere with a change of policy. But of course, the people who support these never-ending imperialist wars rule the state, they rule the corporate media, and they supported the war. And since then, thousands and thousands and thousands, perhaps millions of US troops have landed in Shannon Airport on their way to and from all these wars. Now here's another opportunity on the 27th of February for the Dáil to vote in favour of neutrality, in favour of this bill, the effect of which would be to terminate the use of Shannon Airport being used by the Americans, or indeed any other state involved in a war. The Peace and Neutrality Alliance is not simply a peace movement. It's a very clearly conscious anti-imperialist organisation. Therefore, the organisation globally that we are affiliated to is the World Peace Council. And their position on Syria, on Libya, is total opposition to the intervention by NATO, the US and EU military forces. These are essentially imperialist wars. And the countries that are now seeing blowback, as we saw in France and in Denmark, these countries are actively and enthusiastically supporting these very same Al-Qaeda and Islamic State rebels when they were at war with the state, when they collaborated with them in the wars against Syria, the Syrian state and the Libyan state.
Ireland should not support war on Syria without a UN mandate. Now, was that mandate ever?
No, I mean, there was no question of the United Nations Security Council giving a mandate to go to war with Syria, because as you probably know, a year or so before that, the Russians abstained on a vote to go to war with the state of Libya. And as we know, Ireland fully supported the war conducted by the Americans and the NATO military operations to effectively destroy the state of Libya. And this was actively and enthusiastically supported by Eamon Gilmore and the Labour Party when he was then the Minister for Foreign Affairs. and the consequences. And PANA was virtually one of the very few peace organisations, when the word get up and go, to be against the war on Libya, that the war in Libya would be a disastrous war, just as the war on Iraq was. And we have a major problem in terms of the total unwillingness of the corporate media in this country to give any kind of alternate view. And of course now, several years later, the consequences of that war is, what was it, two or 3 days ago, 100 Christians from Egypt were killed. Because once you destroy the state, into that state comes the vacuum, into a vacuum, and into that vacuum comes these Muslim fundamentalists, who in fact were armed by the British and the French and the Americans to go in their war against Gaddafi as well, on top of the 4-month bombing campaign by NATO. So this is a clear, conscious decision of NATO and of the European Union to destroy a state and have it taken over by the very people they are allegedly against. When the Irish state was established in January 1919, and there was a war against the British, that there was a truce, and then the people representing the Irish Republic negotiating with the British Empire, in their draft papers given to the then British Empire, was that Irish neutrality should be permanent. This is an integral part of the state's policy right across the board. So you're talking about people who now look back to either Fine Gael or to Fianna Fáil or to Labour or any of these parties, all of whom were all together at one stage in this very broad coalition in favour of neutrality. In 2013, when it looked like France and the United States and Britain were about to go to war with the Syrian state, we asked Red C Poll to carry out a survey to ask the Irish people what their view was. What it showed was that 78% of the Irish people supported a policy of Irish neutrality. In other words, the war that's now being carried on was being supported by Ireland, by France, by Britain, by America. And they knew what they were doing when they were giving weapons and guns to the so-called rebels, which we now know are fundamentalist Muslims interested in committing effectively mass murder on a continuous basis towards anybody who doesn't agree with them. Well, public opinion is on their side with the Red C poll. 78% of people support Irish neutrality, and that was at a time when we were going to go to war with Syria, or the European Union and America were going to go to Syria. If they were not, and if they were in favour then, I strongly suspect with a war with Russia, it could be up to 85%. I mean, there is a certain sense, and I know in Irish history there's a deeply rooted imperialist tradition. As we know, in 1914, the entire political elite, all the churches, all the media wanted to take part in the First World War 100 years ago. Now, there are still people like that. There's no doubt in my mind there's a deeply rooted imperialist tradition among the Irish corporate media. We probably have one of the most right-wing, pro-imperialist corporate media in Europe. Maybe I exaggerate a bit, but not much. So it is important that there are videos like this, opportunities for other people to have an alternate view, at least available to them to watch if they get the chance. I'm convinced that there is also a deeply rooted anti-imperialist tradition that has its roots in the Republican tradition of Connolly, the Republican tradition of Tone. And I think that that tradition hasn't gone away either, you know. And I think it's back on the up and up. And I think even if this bill is defeated, and I think the evidence is it's unlikely to pass, I think there's a fundamental change happening among the Irish people. We are not partners in the European Union. We are subordinate slaves, effectively, within an empire. Well, it shouldn't have a major consequence for the Irish Army. I mean, the Irish Army, under a state which is declaredly neutral, can take part in peacekeeping operations indirectly under the auspices of the United Nations. In fact, we would argue that it would make it better and easier for Irish soldiers to participate directly under the auspices of the United Nations in peacekeeping operations if they were doing so under a state which is a declared neutral state, rather than the process that's happening now of being steadily integrating itself into a European Union that is developing a major military dimension and a single foreign policy. But they're now apparently also supporting a possible war with Russia. And however insane it is to take part in a war with Al-Qaeda at least don't have nuclear weapons. And I have no idea what it is that allows people that are so devoted to this European empire and this militarized superstate, the United States of America, and the whole militarization process, that they will actually do anything, absolutely anything they want, to the extent of willingly walk into a war that would see the end of all life on this planet. You would think there would be some kind of element within some of them to think, well, maybe this isn't a good idea. The bill will be in the Dáil and debated on the 27th, and the vote will be the following Tuesday. And we are asking everybody who sees this video to contact their own local TD and ask them to vote in favour of this